I should have trusted my instincts the moment she placed the plate in front of me. The candlelight flickered off the glass walls of the Manhattan penthouse, casting golden patterns over the sleek marble dining table. It was set impeccably with modern china, gold-plated cutlery, and vintage Bordeaux in thin-stemmed crystal glasses. My mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, sat at the head of the table, immaculate in a tailored navy dress, her silver hair swept back. Her expression unreadable, she gestured subtly toward my plate with a faint expectant smile. "This," she announced, "is a recipe I learned at a retreat in Provence. Something special, just for you." The words should have felt like an honor, a rare olive branch, from a woman who'd never fully welcomed me into her pristine, curated dynasty. Instead, they sent a quiet shiver racing down my spine. "Before we begin, I just want to thank you for joining this story. If you're into tales of wealth, manipulation, and dangerous power plays, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us bring you more thrilling content. Now, let's get into it." The salad before me looked exquisite, too exquisite. The baby arugula shimmered under the chandelier's soft glow, scattered with crushed pistachios, golden beets, and a drizzle of vinaigrette that smelled wrong. Not spoiled. Not exactly unpleasant either, but there was an edge, something synthetic hiding beneath the citrusy tan. I mustered a smile, lifting my fork with deliberate ease. Across from me, my sister-in-law Juliette was already halfway through hers, chatting breezily as though this meal were just another elegant evening in our lives. Juliette, the golden child. The family's flawless, always subtly competing with me, though I never accepted the invitation. "Try it," Margaret coaxed, her voice smooth, indulgent. "I had you in mind when I made it." I hesitated just long enough for my husband, Nicholas, to glance over, only half engaged, lost in conversation with his father about a real estate merger. Typical. He never noticed the cold, quiet wars simmering between the women in his family. I twirled a forkful of salad, pretending to admire the presentation. "Looks delicious," I murmured, lifting it toward my lips but pausing just before the bite. The scent intensified. My stomach twisted. I needed to move fast. Juliette, ever the showpiece, had already polished off her plate. She dabbed her lips delicately with a linen napkin, her smile triumphant, as if to remind me, yet again, that she could beat me at a game I wasn't even playing. My eyes flicked from my plate to hers, and in that split second, an idea I set my fork down slowly, adjusting my napkin as I shifted in my seat. Then, ever so gently, I pushed my plate slightly forward, just enough to swap positions. As my fingers grazed the cool porcelain, I executed a seamless switch. No one noticed, especially not Juliette, too engrossed in recounting some client victory to our father-in-law, Edward. But Margaret noticed. She always noticed. I caught the way her gaze lingered just a hair too long on the plate now sitting in front of Juliette. I met her eyes and smiled, reflecting her earlier unreadable warmth. Then, slowly, I picked up my fork again and took a bite from the salad Juliette had originally been served. Margaret's expression shifted, subtle, but telling, before she quickly returned to her usual poise. She was watching too closely now. Meanwhile, Juliette had already picked up my former plate, and without hesitation, scooped up a generous forkful of greens. She was too busy soaking in Edward's approval to notice anything amiss. And then I waited. Around us, conversation hummed. Glasses clinked. Laughter punctuated the air. Margaret resumed her polite chat with Edward, though I noticed she barely touched her own meal. Her eyes, however, kept flicking toward Juliette, watching, waiting. That's when I knew I had been right. It was subtle at first, just a shift in Juliette's posture, a faint crease in her brow. She took another bite, chewed, swallowed. Then she blinked slowly, as if her focus blurred. Minutes passed. My stomach tightened, not from food but from anticipation, from confirmation. Juliette coughed once, cleared her throat, then again, louder this time. Nick turned to her, his brow furrowed with concern. "You okay?" She nodded quickly. "Yeah, just dry spices or something," she mumbled. But her voice was strained, her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water. Juliette's eyes were wide, almost glassy. She looked from one face to another, her breath ragged. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. But something wasn't right. I felt wrong. Margaret's expression didn't shift, not really. She stepped forward with the elegance of someone long practiced in the art of rehearsed concern. "Maybe an allergic reaction," she offered, laying a perfectly manicured hand on Juliette's arm, so gently it looked almost maternal. "Almost." Juliette shook her head, slowly at first. "I don't have allergies," there it was. A crack. Small, but unmistakable. Edward cleared his throat, the sound abrupt in the thick silence. Perhaps we should have someone take a look, just in case, he said. Voice steadier than before though his eyes remained glued to Margaret. Juliette hesitated. I could see her teetering between the world she had always known, and the one that was unfolding right in front of her. She wanted to believe in her mother's innocence. But her body had betrayed her, and that betrayal didn't lie. Suddenly her gaze landed on me. It wasn't accusatory, not yet. It was searching, confused, afraid. Did you? She started, her words tentative, fragile. Feel anything? I didn't flinch. I met her eyes and answered softly. No, I feel perfectly fine. The weight of the words settled across the room like a thundercloud. Margaret's fingers tightened around the back of Juliette's chair, her knuckles paling ever so slightly. Edward's brow furrowed. Juliette's lips parted, as though something had begun to take shape in her mind, some terrifying realization she wasn't ready to fully face. But Margaret was faster. You need to rest, darling, she said quickly. A little fresh air will help. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a redirection, a calculated retreat to delay the inevitable. Just then Nicholas reappeared in the doorway, worry etched across his face. Jules? He said, eyes scanning her. You okay? Juliette looked between us, between me and Margaret, a visible conflict twisting in her feature. Then, after a pause that lasted just a heartbeat too long, she nodded. Yeah, I just need a minute. Nicholas placed a steadying hand on her back, and guided her gently out of the room. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, a soft strained rhythm against the cold stone floor. As soon as they were gone, Margaret released the back of the chair and straightened. Her composure slipped, just for a second, but it was enough. You're sharper than I gave you credit for, she murmured, her voice so low only I could hear it. I smiled, calm and measured. And you're more predictable than you think. Edward, still seated beside her, looked between us with growing unease. Margaret, he said, his tone warning. A word. She sighed, graceful even in irritation, and followed him out with the elegance of someone who refused to acknowledge the storm at her back. As the double doors closed behind them, I reached for my water, taking a slow, deliberate sip. Round one was over, and I had won. I sat still in the quiet, letting the tension settle like dust after an earthquake. The dining room, once alive with polished civility, now felt like a suspended breath. I glanced at my untouched wine, then at the half-eaten salad on Juliette's abandoned plate. The fork she'd left behind still held a few wilting greens, innocent in appearance. But we both knew better now. The chandelier above cast its golden light across the gleaming marble, but it no longer felt warm. It felt like a spotlight. A soft shuffle at the far end of the room caught my attention. The maid, Lillian, was clearing the sideboard, silent and efficient, her eyes carefully averted, but something in the way her hand lingered on the rim of Juliette's plate made me pause. She wasn't just collecting dishes, she was checking. I watched her closely, measuring the way she moved. Then, without looking up, she spoke, barely a whisper. She saw everything. My spine stiffened. Margaret? Lillian's lips pressed together. She nodded once subtly. She always. I rose slowly from my chair and crossed the room to her. Did you notice anything else? Lillian hesitated, casting a quick glance toward the hallway, where Margaret had disappeared. The salad, she said softly. Yours was prepared separately. I didn't respond at first. I just inhaled through my nose, letting the confirmation roll over me like a tide I'd already expected. Thank you. Lillian gave the briefest of nods and returned to her task, as invisible as ever. I turned back toward the table, smoothing my dress as I moved, collecting myself for what would come next. Because this wasn't over, not even close. A soft creak drew my attention to the hallway. I looked up just in time to see Juliette returning, alone. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes, once so sharp and confident, now brimmed with uncertainty. She hovered in the doorway, not entering, but not retreating either. Can I talk to you? She asked, her voice strained. I nodded. Of course. She stepped in, closing the door behind her. For a few seconds she just stood there, arms crossed tightly across her chest like armor. I've been thinking, she said, about the salad. About everything. I said nothing, letting her. Her fingers tapped nervously against her elbow. It doesn't make sense. I was fine. I felt fine. And then, her voice trailed off, and her eyes found mine. You switched the plates, didn't you? I didn't flinch. Yes. She blinked, as if she hadn't expected honesty. But why? She asked, almost in a whisper. I took a step closer. Because I knew something was wrong. Her jaw clenched. And you let me eat it. I didn't know it would do what it did, I said calmly, but I knew it wasn't meant for me. Juliette sat down slowly, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. She rubbed her temples, eyes shut. I always thought she protected me. She did, I said gently, until you became collateral. She looked up stricken. But why would she do that to you? You're her family. No, I said. I'm her threat. The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Juliette looked away, shaking her head. She's my mother, and I'm your brother's wife. She let out a bitter laugh, but it cracked halfway. This family is messed up. I didn't disagree. After a long silence, she looked at me again. What now? I crossed my arms. Now we stop pretending. Her lips parted. She didn't argue. She didn't deny. She nodded. Okay, she whispered. And just like that, I wasn't fighting this alone anymore. Not really. I left the dining room quietly, the scent of polished wood and aged wine clinging to the air like an echo of what had happened. My heels clicked softly on the tile as I made my way down the hallway. The house, so grand and composed on the outside, was beginning to fracture on the inside. Margaret's grip was slipping just barely, but in a household like this, even a hairline crack could become catastrophic. At the foot of the stairs, I paused. I could hear Nicholas's voice upstairs, calm but worried. Juliette's quieter, They were in the guest room. No doubt he probably had a glass of water in one hand, and the other resting gently on her shoulder, trying to reassure her while avoiding the real question they were both thinking. What the hell just happened? I turned away from the staircase and moved toward the study. The heavy oak door was half open, warm light spilling out onto the hallway carpet. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. Edward was there, standing by the fireplace with a half-empty tumbler of scotch. He didn't look surprised to see me. You handled yourself well tonight, he said after a moment. I raised an eyebrow. That's one way to put it. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit. I hesitated, then obeyed. The silence between us was taut, but not uncomfortable. I've watched Margaret control this family for over 3 decades, he said quietly, sometimes with charm, sometimes with fear, often with both. I didn't speak. She never used to be this reckless, he added, almost to himself. She always knew where the lines were. She just made sure everyone else stayed on the side she preferred. I studied him, but tonight she crossed one. He nodded, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Because you didn't break like she expected. We were quiet again. The fire crackled softly behind him, casting a shifting glow across the shelves of law books and oil portraits. I know what she's doing, I said finally. I know about the safe in her office. I know there are files. Edward stiffened. His eyes met mine sharply. Who told you? Does it matter? He downed the rest of his drink and turned back to the fire. It does if you're planning on using them. I stood, slow and steady. Only if she gives me no choice. He didn't respond for a long time. Then finally he said, she keeps the combination in her vanity drawer, taped under the tray. I blinked. I'm tired, he added, his voice heavy. I don't want to spend the rest of my life watching her destroy everyone just to prove she's untouchable. I stepped toward the door, pausing just long enough to say, then maybe don't. He didn't reply. I left the study and moved down the corridor, my mind spinning. The safe, the records, a breadcrumb trail of secrets, and I finally had a map, but I would need. I found Juliette sitting on the edge of the fountain in the rear garden, the moonlight cutting across her face like glass. She was clutching a knit shawl tightly around her shoulders, her eyes red-rimmed but alert. She didn't flinch when I approached. In fact, she almost looked like she was expecting me. She always makes it look so effortless, she said, not looking up, like she's just being a good hostess. A caring mother. She's had practice. Juliette finally looked at me. She said I was imagining, that I'm under too much pressure from work, that I was tired, hungry, emotional. I crouched slightly so we were eye level. And do you believe her? Juliette paused. Then finally, she shook her head. No, I nodded. Good. She straightened slowly, folding the shawl more tightly around herself. So what now? I studied her for a beat. Now, we gather proof. Her brow furrowed. Proof. She's not just manipulative. She's dangerous. But no one will stand against her unless we have something real, undeniable. Juliette hesitated. You think she'd do that again? I gave a tight smile. I think next time she won't miss. Juliette shivered, not from the cold. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a key. Midnight. Her office. I need someone watching the hallway. She stared at the key like it might burn her fingers. You really think we can bring her down? I met her gaze. No, I think we can make her bring herself down. Juliette slowly took the key. The game had changed. Now it was our move. I straightened, eyes locked on Lillian, as her words settled in the space between us like smoke. Not like this. That meant this wasn't just a warning, it was a turning point. Margaret hadn't merely failed, she had miscalculated, and people like her didn't live. Not unless something slipped through the cracks. Not unless someone like me slipped through. I gave Lillian a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of her courage in even saying that much. Her eyes met mine for a beat, and though she quickly dropped her gaze again, I saw it, the shift, the awareness, the subtle quiet alliance that had begun to form in the margins of this house. I turned away, my heels whispering against the tile as I moved toward the staircase. My reflection trailed beside me in the darkened windows, poised, composed, but beneath it all burning. Margaret wouldn't make the same mistake twice, and if she truly believed I was a threat now, she would come for me, directly, thoroughly, and with everything she had left. I needed to move first. When I reached my bedroom, the door already ajar, I paused. Inside, Juliette sat at the edge of the bed, her arms wrapped around her midsection like she was holding herself together. She looked up as I entered, and for the first time since dinner I saw it in her resolve, buried beneath the uncertainty. She didn't say anything, so You came to the right place. Juliette let out a breath, half sigh, half laugh. I still can't believe it. I keep trying to find some other explanation, but no matter how many ways I replay it, it always ends the same. She made a move, I said softly, and it failed. She would have let it happen, Juliette said, voice tightening. If you hadn't switched the plates. I nodded. She would have let it happen. Juliette swallowed hard, then stood. So what do we do? I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out the small flash drive I'd taken earlier, copies of financial files I had quietly transferred from Margaret's private server 2 weeks ago. I had suspected she'd eventually try something, but I hadn't expected it this soon. I'm going to dismantle her the way she built this family, I said, piece by piece. Juliette stepped closer, looking down at the drive in my hand. And you think that's enough? No, I admitted. But it's a start. She hesitated. You said earlier, you weren't asking me to pick sides. I'm not, I said, but I need to know, are you ready to see her for who she really is? Juliette looked at me for a long, loaded moment. Then she nodded. Then I need your help. She swallowed. What do you need me to do? I handed her the flash drive. I need you to distract her, just for an hour tomorrow morning, long enough for me to access the safe in her office. She'll know, she said. She'll suspect. I corrected. But if we do this right, she won't be able to prove anything. Not yet. Juliette took the drive and nodded, though I could see the hesitation still clinging to her shoulders. What's in the safe? Everything, I said. The secrets she's used to keep this family under her control. Blackmail, financial leverage. Leverage she no longer deserves to hold. Juliette sat back down, her hands curling around the flash drive like it might break if she held it too tightly. You think she's going to come after you? I looked at her, dead center. She already has. A long silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full of memory, of shift, of choices made and bridges burned. Finally, Juliette said, then let's make sure she never gets the chance again. Juliette didn't leave right away. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers absently pulling at a loose thread on her sleeve, her eyes distant, somewhere between memory and awakening. The soft hum of the city beyond the window pulsed in quiet rhythm with her breathing. I used to think she did everything for the family, she said finally, her voice low, that every rule, every cold smile, every no was because she had some bigger vision in mind, something protective, strong. I stayed quiet. She wasn't talking to me, not really. She was talking to the part of herself that had clung to that illusion for so long. But now, she continued, I think it was always about her, not the family, just control. She's built an empire on it, I said. Juliette nodded. And you're planning to burn it down? Only if she keeps trying to bury me in it. She glanced at me, something almost like admiration flickering behind her eyes. Then I guess it's good someone finally knows where the matches are. We sat in silence for a few more seconds before she finally stood. I'll go back to my room. If she asks, I'll say we talked about nothing, just clearing the air. I nodded. Good. She hesitated at the door, then looked back. She won't stop, Claire. Even if we have everything, she'll keep pushing until someone breaks. She's counting on that someone being me, I said. Let's make sure she's wrong. Juliette gave a small brittle smile, and slipped out into the hall, the door clicking shut behind her like the end of a truce. No one ever formally declared. Once she was gone, I moved quickly. I opened the drawer in my vanity and pulled out a slim black folder I'd hidden beneath a layer of scar. Inside were photographs, screenshots of encrypted files I'd managed to intercept from Margaret's private email server, along with transcripts of hush-hush messages between her and various board members at Whitmore Capital. Most of it was circumstantial, but some of it was damn. My next move would need to be precise. One wrong step, and I'd give her the ammunition she needed to label me paranoid, manipulative, even unstable. She'd love that, painting me as the problem. It was her favorite narrative, but I wasn't going to give her the chance. I slipped the folder into a secure envelope, locking it in the travel safe I kept behind a false panel in the closet. If something happened, if this game turned lethal, someone needed to be able to finish what I started. And that someone wasn't Nicholas. Not yet. There was a soft knock at the door again. I didn't expect company at this hour. I opened it slowly to find Lillian standing there, her eyes darting once over her shoulder before settling back on mine. I found something, she whispered. She held out a small item wrapped in a linen napkin. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a silver capsule, smooth, polished, almost decorative. But the moment I saw it, I knew it didn't belong to anything on that dining table. What is it? I asked quietly. It was under the cart where the salad dressing was prepped. No one else would have noticed. My heart thudded once, low and deep. Do you think she meant to leave it? Lillian shook her head. She's careful, too careful, but she was rushing tonight, and upset. I turned the capsule in my hand. Thank you. Lillian hesitated, then stepped back into the hall. You should hide it. If she realizes it's gone. I know, I said. She nodded and disappeared into the dark, silent again. As I held the capsule up to the lamplight, I saw something etched faintly on the bottom, an insignia, a pharmaceutical lab in Geneva, international, untraceable, just like her, but now she'd left a thread, and all I had to do was pull. Tomorrow because the only thing Margaret hated more than losing, was being exposed. Margaret finally broke eye contact, but not before something flickered behind her gaze, something sharp, almost primal. She reached for her napkin with slow precision, dabbing the corner of her mouth even though it was already spotless. I suppose, she said, her voice quiet but crisp, we all have different ways of interpreting events. Some see coincidence, others conspiracy. I gave her a pleasant smile, and some just prefer clarity. Her eyes flicked back to me. Clarity is dangerous when it's mistaken for truth. Only when the truth is inconvenient, I replied. Juliette glanced between us, visibly unsettled. She set her fork down with more force than necessary, the clang of metal against porcelain like a punctuation mark. Neither of us asked for. Nicholas cleared his throat, attempting to ease the tension. Maybe we should talk about something else. Margaret looked at him, her expression softening with practiced ease. Of course. How's the expansion coming along at the Manhattan office? He blinked. It's on track. Good, she said, sipping her tea as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. But the atmosphere hadn't shifted. Not really. The tension had simply changed its clothes, traded knives for silk gloves. The war continuing beneath layers of civility. Edward turned the page of his newspaper with slow deliberation. Juliette, he said, voice calm, you mentioned last week you had something in development for the LA clients. Juliette startled slightly, then nodded. Yes, I'm working on a rollout for Q3, but I might need to travel next month. Margaret smiled faintly. We'll talk about that later. It wasn't a suggestion. It never was. Juliette looked down at her plate. Margaret's control was tightening again, quiet and precise. She was retreating into familiar patterns, and everyone else was falling in line, but this time I had my own pattern to follow. I let the conversation swirl around me without joining in, choosing instead to study Margaret's every move. The way her hand lingered a moment too long on her teacup, the calculated tilt of her head, the subtle glances she sent Juliette's way whenever she spoke. She was checking for cracks, and if she saw one she would wedge herself in, but the cracks weren't where she expected them anymore, they were beneath her. Juliette caught my eye across the table, just for a moment, and in that second, I saw it, the faintest nod. Small, almost imperceptible, but deliberate. She was still with me. I rose from my seat, folding my napkin neatly and setting it down beside my plate. Excuse me, I said, keeping my tone light. I think I'll get some fresh air. Margaret's gaze snapped to me, still smiling. Of course, dear. Take your time. I turned without another word. my heels soft against the tile as I exited the dining room. Upstairs I slipped into the corridor that led to her private office, the key Juliette had left me last night tucked discreetly into my palm. The morning staff would be distracted for at least the next 15 minutes, exactly what we'd planned. I reached the ornate double doors, heart thudding with the slow deliberate rhythm of anticipation. I slid the key into the lock. Click. The doors opened with a soft groan. Inside, Margaret's office was as pristine as always. Every surface gleamed, every document neatly aligned. On the wall behind the desk hung a gold-framed oil painting, her of course poised and victorious, the throne she built and protected with deception. But beneath that painting, hidden behind a sliding panel, was the safe. I crossed the room and dropped to my knees in front of it. The numbers on the dial gleamed. I remembered what Edward had told me. Her mother's birth year, 1949. I turned the dial, once, twice, 3 times. Click. The safe door eased open. Inside was a fortress of folders, USBs and bound contracts, each one labeled with surgical precision. I began scanning for the ones that mattered. Juliette Whitmore, Nicholas Whitmore, postnuptial agreement, Edward Whitmore, confidential holdings, and then finally my name, Claire Whitmore, niece Sinclair. My hand hovered over the folder for a beat. Then I grabbed it, and the 2 labeled black file. Internal code M. Because Margaret hadn't just built her kingdom with loyalty. She built it with secrets. And now I held them. The wind stirred the surface of the fountain, sending ripples across the reflection of the sky. Juliette stared into it like she was searching for answers in the water. She always made it look like strength, she said quietly, like every decision was for the good of the family. But now I see it. It was fear, control masquerading as she doesn't know any other way, I said. But that doesn't make it right. Juliette nodded slowly. So what happens next? I glanced back at the house, the sunlight glinting off the bedroom windows like the gaze of something always watching. Now I said, we make her feel what it's like to not be in control. Juliette looked over at me, a spark igniting behind her tired eyes. Do you really think we can? We already have, I said. She's panicking, she's losing you. That's more than she's ever lost before. Juliette's lips pressed into a tight line, and then she nodded more firmly this time. What do you need me to do? She asked. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time she wasn't speaking as the golden child, not as the daughter raised in privilege and programmed loyalty. She was speaking as a woman ready to choose her own path. I need you to act like nothing's changed, I said. Be her perfect daughter. Tell her you believe her. Let her think she still has you in the palm of her hand. Juliette frowned. That won't be easy. No, I said, but it's the only way. She has to feel safe again, safe enough to get sloppy. She let out a breath. And you? I'll be doing the opposite, I said. I'll be quietly removing the ground beneath her feet. Juliette let that sit between us for a long moment. Then she stood and smoothed her blouse. She's going to come for you, she said. She already did, I replied. Now it's my turn. And the staff moved like ghosts, silent and swift. Margaret was nowhere to be seen, but I knew she was there, somewhere in the shadows, watching, listening, calculating. I returned to my room, locking the door behind me before crossing to the closet. The envelope I'd taken from the safe was still there, tucked behind the panel. But now that I had it, I needed to decide how to use it. Too early and she'd spin the narrative. Too late, and she'd find a way to disappear the evidence. Or I sat on the edge of the bed, thumbing through the folders again. One stood out, labeled not with a name, but with a single word, contingencies. I opened it. Inside were documents, unsigned but damning, records of offshore transfers, medical authorizations that made no ethical sense, and legal drafts that hinted at a future I was clearly meant to be excluded from. One in particular caught my eye, a clause buried in legal jargon, but unmistakable. In the event of a divorce, Claire Sinclair Whitmore shall forfeit all rights to holdings, equity and marital estate assets, based on Conduct Clause 4B, behavior deemed damaging to family reputation or structure. It wasn't just about control. She was planning my erasure. Ju was planning my erasure. Ju was planning my erasure. Ju was planning. My phone buzzed. A message from Juliette. She wants tea in the sunroom. Just the 2 of us. I typed back quickly. Good. Keep her talking. Mention LA. Say you're second-guessing your ability to lead the project. A pause. Why? Because she won't be able to help herself. Because Margaret didn't know how to let anything go, not control, not narratives, not power. And while she was busy weaving her web around Juliette, I'd be pulling the threads she didn't know were already frayed. I swallowed hard, forcing my breath to steady. She's good at that, I said, making the lie feel easier than the truth. Juliette gave a hollow nod, wrapping her arms around herself like she needed the weight of her own body to keep from unraveling. She said I was fragile, that I've always been too emotional, that I get swept up in other people's storms because I don't know how to navigate my own. Her voice cracked, just barely, but she didn't let it break. I almost believed her, she whispered, until I remembered who was actually there for me last night. I stepped closer. It wasn't her. No, she said. It was you. The confession hung between us like a lifeline. I think I needed to hear her say those things. Juliette added, to see how quickly she turned it on me the second I questioned her. That's what did it. That's when I knew it wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was strategic, cold. I didn't speak. I just let her sit with her own clarity because once it took root, it wouldn't go away. Juliette looked back toward the house. She's not going to stop. No, I said. She's going to double down. She nodded again, her jaw tight. She told me she's planning to fix this, that she's going to correct the shift in the dynamic. Her exact words. I exhaled slowly. Then we don't have time. What do you want to do? I met her eyes. I want to take back the narrative, and I want to do it with facts. Paper. Proof. Not just suspicion. Juliette straightened. The files you took from her safe. There's more, I said. A contingency plan. Contracts. Hidden assets. Postnups. She's been preparing for every scenario except this one. Except us. Juliette's brow furrowed. So what's the plan? I paused, making sure no one was nearby. I want her to think we've backed down. That last night shook me. That you've returned to her side. I want her comfortable again. Confident. It's the only way she'll reveal her real endgame. Juliette hesitated. You want me to lie to her? I want you to do what she's always done to you, feed her a version of yourself She gave a bitter smile. She taught me how to do that better than anyone. Then it's time to graduate. She let out a breath. When? Tonight, I said. There's a board dinner at the club. She'll be distracted managing the optics. And I'll be here, I said, digging deeper. There's one file I haven't opened yet. The one with my name on it. Juliette's eyes darkened. What do you think is in it? I didn't hesitate. A plan to erase me. Her expression hard. Then let's make sure she's the one who disappears. 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 That night would be the beginning of the end. Not with a scream, not with a public scandal, but with the sound Margaret feared most. Silence when she was expecting control. A silence that would grow until it consumed everything she built. And the only voice left standing would be mine. Juliette sat in silence, her fingers still gripping the edge of the bench like it was the only solid thing in her world. The garden around us felt unusually still. The fountain's trickle, the rustle of leaves, all too quiet, as though the estate itself was holding its breath. What kind of secret would it have to be? She asked softly. To keep a man like my father quiet for all these years. I watched her carefully. Something that would ruin him, personally, publicly, something she could hold over him whenever he got too close to stepping out of line. Juliette shook her head. He's always been so distant. I thought he just didn't care. No, he was surviving her the only way he knew how. Her eyes met mine, glassy but clear. Do you think he'd help us? I considered it. Not unless he feels like he has no other choice. He's not an ally. Not yet. But if we can find out what she has on him, what she's used to control him, we can flip that dynamic. Juliette leaned back, rubbing her arms again, her voice just above a whisper. There's a locked cabinet in her study. She never lets anyone near it, not even housekeeping. I asked her once what was inside, and she told me it was her legacy. I met her gaze. Then we need a key. Juliette hesitated. She keeps her keys on her at all times. Not while she showers, I said, or when she does her skincare routine. She's meticulous but not invincible. She blinked. You want me to go through her things? No, I said, standing. I'll do it. She rose with me. Claire, if she catches you, she won't. I cut in, because she won't be expecting anyone to strike while she still thinks she's ahead. Juliette still looked unsure, but this time she didn't protest. Tonight, I said, while she's in her bath, you keep her distracted. Compliment her. Ask for advice. Play the perfect daughter. Juliette let out a breath that sounded like surrender and commitment at once. And what if she suspects? Then you're exactly where she expects you to be, I said, at her side, pretending to be obedient. Juliette nodded slowly. She taught me how to fake that. Good, I said, voice low. Time to use her own lessons against her. Juliette off. That night, the house dimmed earlier than usual. Margaret had retreated to her private wing with a crystal glass of wine and her usual lavender oil. The staff knew better than to linger on that side of the estate once the curtains were drawn. Juliette had just texted me, "She's in the tub." 10 minutes in, I moved quickly, through the servant corridor past the linen closet, and down the narrow back hallway that led to Margaret's study. I'd memorized the timing of the security sweep, the sensor blind spots, the creaky floorboards to avoid. Inside the study I didn't turn on the lights. I moved by moonlight and memory. The cabinet was where Juliette said it would be, near the back wall, obscured by a tall indoor plant, and a carved chair no one ever sat in. It was locked, of course. Brass hardware, old but sturdy. I pulled a thin metal pin from the inside lining of my coat. Juliette had told me Margaret used a vintage locking mechanism. What she didn't know was that I'd spent a year in law school, learning how to get into places I wasn't supposed to. 2 minutes. Click. The cabinet creaked open. Inside were rows of leather-bound folders. No labels, just clean, unassuming spines. I pulled one, then another, and then I found it. A file marked with one word, Edward. My stomach turned. I opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, legal documents, transaction receipts, and a medical file. I scanned the pages. My breath hitched. A paternity test. Not Nicholas's, Juliette's. I blinked, reading it twice. The test wasn't for Juliette. It was about her. Edward wasn't her biological father. Margaret had lied to the entire family. No wonder he stayed silent. No wonder he never pushed back. I heard a creak in the hallway and froze. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate. Juliette's voice. "Claire." I stepped out of the shadows. "Close the door behind you." She did. I handed her the file. She flipped through the pages, her expression darkening with every "She's been using this to keep him quiet," she said finally. "And she's been using it to shape your entire life." Juliette looked up at me, her hands trembling. "We have to show him." I nodded. "And then we show the world." The door creaked as it opened, just enough for me to slip inside. The room was dark, but I didn't dare reach for the light. Moonlight spilled in through the tall windows, silvering the outlines of furniture, casting long angular shadows across the antique rug. Margaret had always kept this room immaculate, a shrine to order, to control. A place where chaos didn't exist unless she had personally orchestrated it. But tonight I was bringing the chaos. I closed the door behind me with a soft click and crossed to the far wall, where the built-in shelves rose from floor to ceiling. The panel I needed was hidden behind a row of books no one ever read. I pressed against the trim, 1 inch left, then in, and a small click rewarded me. The false panel slid open just enough to reveal the safe. Brass-plated, vintage, inscribed with delicate initials. M.W. Margaret Whitmore. I crouched before it, pulling the slip of paper from my sleeve where I'd scribbled the code. Edward hadn't known the full combination, but he gave me enough to guess. The rest I figured out by watching Margaret's habits. Her obsession with her mother's birthday, the number of years since her wedding, the year she founded her personal trust. 4 digits. I turned the dial. 4, 9, 6, 2. The lock released with a snick, and my heart lurched. I exhaled once, then opened the door. Inside were rows of black folders, neatly labeled in gold foil, every one a name, a person, a piece of leverage. Nicholas, Juliette, Edward, board members, staff, lawyer, press contacts, and then buried beneath them all, Claire Sinclair. I reached for it. Before I could open it, I heard footsteps outside. I froze, heart hammering. 2 quick knocks. A pause. Juliette. I opened the door an inch. "Come in," I whispered. She slipped inside, wide-eyed. "Someone's walking the upper hall. I think it's just staff, maybe Lillian." "Help me," I said, pulling folders quickly from the safe. "We're taking only what we need." She nodded, stepping beside me. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the file labeled Edward. "I want to know what she's held over him," she said. "We'll find out." We stuffed the most damning documents into my satchel. My file, Edward's the contingency folder, labeled simply exit, and one labeled black file, internal code M, Margaret's nuclear plan. If I had to guess. We closed the safe, slid the panel back into place, and straightened the room. Just as I reached for the doorknob, Juliette whispered, Wait. I turned to see her standing at Margaret's desk, staring at the old ledger she kept in the drawer, a physical log of favors, debts, promise. She ran her fingers across it, then slowly slid it into her coat. She'll notice, I warned. I want her to, she said. And I realized then, Juliette wasn't just helping me, she was making her own move. We crept back through the hallway, down the stairs past the east gallery. The entire house felt heavy, thick with ghosts and secrets. But this time we weren't afraid of them. We crept back through the hallway, down the stairs past the east gallery. The entire house felt heavy, thick with ghosts and secrets. But this time we weren't afraid of them. We reached my room and locked the door behind us. I dumped the contents of the satchel across the bed. Juliette. Juliette reached for the Edward file, flipping it open with unsteady hands. Inside, documents, receipts, a paternity test. She gasped. I knew it, she whispered. He's not my father. I closed my eyes. She's been using it for decades. Juliette's hands shook, but she didn't cry. She built everything on lies, she said. And now it's ours. I picked up the folder with my name on it. I hadn't opened it yet. Juliette looked at me. Are you ready? I nodded. Breaking the seal. Inside, I found a signed agreement from a private investigator dated 2 years before my wedding. Financial logs from my father's estate, ones I hadn't seen in years, manipulated to make me look unstable, irresponsible. A forged psychiatric evaluation, dated 6 months ago. Juliette's hand flew to her mouth. She was setting you up, she said, to make you look like a liability. I nodded, the weight of it hitting me all at once. She wasn't going to just erase me from the family, I said. She was going to destroy my credibility. Juliette met my eyes. Then we show them the truth. The clock struck midnight. Down the hall, Margaret slept in peace, but her empire was no longer hers. And by dawn she would realize, the shadows she'd used to control this family were now working against her. Margaret's eyes darted to the folder in my hands again, as if she could will it back into her possession. You think leverage is power, she said, her voice still cool, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. That's not power, that's noise. You don't know what to do with it. Juliette shifted beside me, jaw tight. We know enough. Margaret turned to her daughter slowly, as though only now acknowledging her betrayal. You, she said, almost pitying. You never had the stomach for this. Juliette's voice was quiet but steady. Maybe, but I'm learning. Margaret's nostrils flared, just slightly. And you're learning from her, she gestured to me with disdain. Do you have any idea what she's doing? What she's risking? You think she cares about this family? She cares about me, Juliette said, more than you ever did. The words landed like a slap. For a moment the silence that followed was louder than shouting. Margaret blinked, once, then her voice dropped, venomous. You'll regret this, both of you. I smiled faintly. Maybe, but at least we won't live under your thumb anymore. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. You think this is the end? This is just a moment. One moment, and it'll pass. You'll panic, you'll fold, and when you do, I'll be waiting. I tilted my head. You always wait. That's your problem. You never see the ones who act first. And then I turned to Juliette. Let's go. We walked past her, side by side. Juliette's shoulders were square, her pace steady. Margaret didn't move. She didn't try to stop us, but I felt her stare burn into my back all the way down the hall. She wouldn't lash out now. She'd retreat, regroup, plan, but the storm had already arrived. And this time it wasn't hers. One sirs. One sirs. One sirs. Back in my room, we dumped the files onto the bed. Juliette stood motionless for a moment, then whispered. She's scared. Yes, I said. And desperate. That makes her dangerous. I nodded. So are we. We spent the next hour organizing what we had. Bank statements, shell companies, falsified medical records, a power of attorney form pre-filled with Nicholas's name and my signature already for. That one chilled me most. She was going to institutionalize you, Juliette whispered. She still might try. Juliette stared down at the paper. Then we need to move faster. I met her gaze. It's time to bring Edward in. She hesitated. Do you think he'll believe us? I pulled Edward's folder from the stack and handed it to her. He won't have a choice. The study door creaked open slowly. Edward was where I expected him by the fireplace. As always, drink in hand. His eyes didn't lift right away, but I knew he'd heard me. The silence in the room was like everything else in this house. Measured, rehearsed, controlled. You're not sleeping either, I said softly, closing the door behind me. His hand paused mid-sip. No one sleeps well in this house. Not. I took a few careful steps forward, the thick rug muffling my footfalls. I found the safe. That got his attention. He looked at me then, tired, resigned but alert. I figured you might. I found your file. His jaw tightened. I wasn't going to show it to anyone, I said. But I think it's time you stopped protecting someone who would never do the same for you. Edward gave a humorless chuckle. That would be most of this family. I reached into my coat and placed the folder on the small table beside him. He stared at it like it might explode. I need to know why, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He knew. He always knew. There was a long pause. The kind that only ends when something sacred breaks. She told me Juliette was mine, he said quietly. I believed her. I raised her, loved her. She was the only part of this whole damn life that ever felt real. I didn't move, but when I found out, she wasn't. His voice cracked. He took a breath, steadied himself. It nearly broke me, and Margaret knew it. She showed me the test when we were fighting, used it as a warning leash. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. She said if I ever left, if I ever tried to turn on her, she'd tell Juliette I'd always known, that I'd lied to her, that everything between us was fake. He shook his head slowly. I couldn't do that to her, not when she was just a child. She's not a child anymore, I said gently. She deserves the truth. He looked up at me then, truly looked at me. She already knows, doesn't she? I nodded. She's the one who handed me your file. Edward closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, they were glassy with something he hadn't let show in years. Then it's over. No, I said. It's just beginning, but this time you don't have to stay in the shadows. He reached for the folder, flipping it open slowly. His fingers trembled as he scanned the documents, financial records, surveillance logs, notes Margaret had kept over the years. This is enough to bury her, he said, barely above a whisper. We're not burying her, I replied. We're unmasking her, letting her destroy herself with her own weapons. He looked at me again, really looked at me. You remind me of her, he said. The sharpness, the way you see people. I stiffened. But there's one difference, he added. You still have a heart. We sat in silence for a while. Not allies, not yet, but something had shifted. Finally Edward spoke again. What do you need me to do? I gave him a small knowing smile. Tell Juliette the truth. All of it. Then when the time comes, stand beside her.